With a string of critically acclaimed documentary films, including The Brooklyn Bridge and the Emmy Award winner of the Civil War, Ken Burns has brought an eager new audience to American history. He is currently at work on his next epic, the story of America's favorite pastime, baseball. We're pleased he could take time now to join us on our first anniversary show. Welcome. I am very pleased to have you here,
I'm
sir.
delighted to be here, Charlie. Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, if you, just day by day, if you can survive one more day. Each day at 12 o'clock I say, whew, I got through another show. Why baseball?
It's a good question. I think that the Civil War was the most defining moment in our past, but baseball is a kind of American opera. We tend to think of American history as wars and generals and presidents, but I think it's really what we do in our spare time as much. And baseball is this wonderful pageant, good and bad, filled with heroes and villains and fools that tell us in the aggregate a lot about who we are. Yeah. And I think that's the appeal to it.
I think that maybe the most oft-quoted quote is Jacques Barzun's quote that to know America you have to, is that about it? To know America you have to know baseball?
If you wish to know the heart and mind of America, study baseball or learn baseball.
Yeah. Now, have you been a baseball fan yourself, or was this something that you thought I ought to know about because it is America?
It's a little bit of both. I played baseball as a kid. I grew up knowing the averages of everyone in the major leagues, but I think that I wasn't the rabid fan that many of the people that we've interviewed are or were. Just like the Civil War, I wasn't a Civil War buff, but I knew that excavating this story was going to bring riches, and it has. We just met extraordinary people and learned about who we are just a little bit more.
You interviewed my buddy Costas on this, didn't you?
Yes, Bob Costas is an amazing baseball fan. I mean, the generation of people, Billy Crystal, too, who grew up in this town, adoring the Yankees.
Jeff Greenfield just talked about the Yankees.
For
years he thought the Yankees could never lose.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, and we do. I mean, it's crept into our language. We're out in left field. We hit home runs. We steal bases. All of that sort of stuff.
Is there a Shelby Foote in this?
No, I think there are many Shelby Footes. Costas is one. Buck O'Neill, an old Negro leaguer, is another. Historian John Thorne, many. This is a huge, huge story over many, many decades.
It must be sad for you as it was for me, because Bart Giamatti was such a wonderful, articulate man about baseball.
We were poised to interview him once the Rose problem was done, and just, of course, afterwards he died.
For Night Watch, one of the favorite interviews I did was a number of interviews with him, just about baseball more than anything else, some about Yale and some about Renaissance literature, but mainly about his own love affair with the game. When you approach these projects, after you've secured the financing, and we've talked about that before, how do you go about it? Give us a little behind-the-scenes look at an epic in the making.
A lot of it is pretty much drudgery, or certainly not glamorous. A lot of it is research. I think our interest owes itself as much to the historian's investigation as to the filmmaker's investigation. A lot of reading, a lot of going to archives, looking at old photographs, reading journals and diaries, less so in baseball's case. We are not paying these people to write Sullivan-Ballou letters. We're in fact encouraging them not to think, but to hit. But excavating that material in a certain way, and then beginning to try to organize thoughts. How do we tell this story? What's the organization? The Civil War had years. What do we do here? And in this case, we're going to divide it into 9 innings, 9 chapters, 9 episodes that will detail each era of the game. So the first inning is the 19th century, and each subsequent decade is another inning as we take it up to the present. And then we work with writers, and in this case, as in the Civil War, my writer is Jeffrey Ward, who is an extraordinary historian in his own right and has mastered, I think, the incredibly difficult art in filmmaking of making history come alive. It's very, very difficult, and what we do is go into certain moments, not always based on whether there's photographs to tell the story, or newsreels in the case of baseball, but go into moments and open it up. So it's not merely a journalistic relationship to the past. This is what happened, and then they did this, and then they did that. But what was it like to be there, to smell the hot dogs, or to hear the cheers of the crowd?
Take me to that inning, to that game, to that moment when he...
Exactly. Well, I hope that in 2 years we can have a conversation in which we're talking about the 20 minutes or the half an hour we spent in the 1903 World Series at the old Huntington Avenue grounds in Boston. There's no newsreels of that, but we found a lot of photographs, and we hope the way we've shot the photographs with a kind of sensitivity to that moment, and the first-person quotes that we found, newspaper reports, players' recollections, combined with the narration, made you feel like you might have been there, that you knew what Nuff said McGreevy, the head of the Royal Rooters, this fanatical band of Boston fans, felt about that series.
Well, this is my transition to the Civil War. Was Lincoln a baseball fan?
Yes. Yes, he and his sons played outside the White House. And in fact, there's a couple of political cartoons that are frequently published about Lincoln with regards to the election of 1860, which has him holding a bat as a sort of a cudgel and a weapon against the other opposing people.
Tell me about Lincoln in your own. I mean, after the series and all, I remember a very poignant thing for you. I've forgotten who you were talking to. And you talked about the moment of the assassination, and you're working at Steinbeck, and I guess, and you know, and you'd come right up to the moment, and you couldn't bring yourself.
It's still, it almost brings me to tears remembering it. But we were in the sound mix, where after years of editing, we had dozens of soundtracks, and we were at this place paying $700 an hour to have them all married into one track. And what we hadn't laid down that day, we'd done the narration and the music and the sounds of Our American Cousin, the play at Ford's Theater. What we hadn't laid down was the shots of Lincoln being killed, or the Booth's gun firing. And we were heading inexorably towards this most incredible moment in our nation's past. And I just realized for a second I had this power to stop it. And I yelled, "Stop!" And we all just looked around, and our eyes filled with tears. And we just sat there with this money running through the meter, and just sat there just for a little bit and kept him from being killed. And there was a wonderful sense of the power, the manipulation in our medium, the force of history, and this man's life. I mean, mainly what you're asking about is, who is this man that we can't seem to get enough of, that we know is at the center of our best aspirations.
And where are those? I mean, U.S. News and World Report has a cover story on Lincoln. This is interesting.
Where are those people now that could speak this language? I was just in Gettysburg over the weekend and walking and tramping the ground still, because it's still very powerful. Wondering where we find these people who write their own speeches, who care very deeply about who we are, that are poet presidents in a way.
What was his genius?
His genius was understanding that the plural union that he was now being asked to preside over was in fact a singular nation, that its future lay in abolishing the plural verb the United States are, and came about in conceiving and helping to initiate the notion of a singular the United States is, which is what we say today, and it's actually ungrammatical. More than anything, even more than the abolition of slavery, which he was absolutely opposed to, and all the debates about whether he was tardy or not, are very important to consider. I think he understood this idea of a nation, a one thing.
But what that begs this question for me is, what was it about Lincoln that gave him such a grasp of that fundamental question?
This is the mystery, and as he would probably say about the inscrutableness of war, the Almighty has his own purposes. I think that Abraham Lincoln, finally what I've come to, is a great gift to all of us, and it was certainly a great gift to that age. But I would like to suggest that perhaps history's greatest service is to allow these people to continue to resonate, so that a man now dead 130 years can have a profound effect on our lives now, not through hero worship, not through the cult of personality, but through some strange resonance in which we understand his purpose.
That there was uniqueness, and there was, genius is not even the right word, that there was a giant that had a message that transcends time. And
read his first inaugural address. Read his second inaugural address. My favorite sentence that he ever wrote is the last sentence of the first inauguration. It's pure poetry, the mystic chords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. That is a president of the United States on the state capitol. Sharpshooters are lining the unfinished dome, guarding against attack here in the United States. And the presence and the poise, the poetry of the man, understanding full well what is before him.
Well, that's powerful, to grasp those words and to be able to communicate. Have you read Gary Will's piece?
Yeah, which is magnificent, really
To
wonderful.
understand the Gettysburg Address.
This changes us. You know, I say this all the time, but it really bears repeating. We've listened to a century and a quarter of stentorian orators saying about the Gettysburg Address, of the people, by the people, for the people, this sort of sense that he had some preoccupation with prepositions, which he didn't. He said of the people, by the people, for the people. He saw the Civil War as the survival of popular government against an old and decaying and decadent aristocracy that could perpetuate slavery in a country born under the sign that all men are created equal. And he was going to ensure that that kind of government would succeed. It's the struggle today. Look at the issues that we speak about now, with Haiti, with Eastern Europe. It's about the same thing that he understood. People. Government of the people.
What is it, how do you view your own mission in a sense of what Ken Burns is about? I mean, are you becoming America's documentarian in a sense? I mean, is that how you see it, or is it different for you?
Well, I had a funny experience. A few months before the Civil War came out, in the summer of 1990, I got visited by lots of reporters doing stories for magazines or newspapers or whatever. One of the most interesting was from an astrologer, and she was writing for an astrology magazine, and it was just sort of yet another one. You said, okay. So I spoke with her, and she took my birth date and left, and I went, oh, geez. So she called back up later, and she told my secretary, not even me, that apparently my chart and the United States of America, that is Philadelphia, July 4th, 1776, were like this. we were good pals.
That explains it.
And then she said, what is happening on September 24th? Because it's an important day. And my secretary said, I don't know. So she told me this, and I thought about it for a week, and then I realized that's the day after the Civil War was launched. So I thought, well, maybe there's something there. I feel like an American possession, like Guam or Samoa, that somehow I have been possessed by American history. The stories set me abuzz in a way that have galvanized what I want to do. I have no idea what the mission is. I know that I want to tell these stories. They come up randomly and haphazardly, and they just need to be told.
And what do you want to say about the American West, which is another project in the future?
I am serving as an executive producer and an advisor on a project to be produced by a close friend of mine, Stephen Ives, which will try to do for the story of the West, the very complicated story of the West that we try to do for Civil War. That is, look at it from a multiplicity of viewpoints, that we could not only know Northern generals, but Southern generals, ordinary soldiers and great generals. Here, we want to look at it from many points of view, that it's a West of complications, of many ethnic groups, of exploitation and conquest, as well as the great exploration that we have usually been presented with, and to try and understand it that way.
What is it you think that in terms of the Civil War, that so resonated with America? Was it, in a sense, people, that you all of a sudden understood this war in terms of a clash of inexorable historical forces, clearly, but more importantly, you began to understand that this was something that was tearing asunder people and families, and that people were going off to war,
well,
to
I think
slaughter.
So. I think part of the reaction and response and our being drawn to it is that it is about people very similar to us. Right. When we hear the Sullivan Ballew's letter, we say, a woman says, or a man says, I wish I could say those words to a woman. And a woman said, I wish I had a man who could say those words to me. And we all have this moment where we realize our own failings as he was realizing his own failings and shortcomings, and that's wonderful. And I think any history that has gone beyond the abstract and didactic ideas, the forces, and deals with human lives is touching something. Then we're dealing with the subject that defined us, much like a traumatic event in the childhood of any individual. The Civil War is that. So when we touch it now, just graze the surface of it, we have this profound emotional reaction, just excitement or tears, anger, I want to know more, All of those things, any investigation of the Civil War will provoke in an American.
Did it change your opinion of any of the characters? I mean, did you come away
Yeah.
with a lesser opinion of Robert E. Lee, for example?
Well, I think superficially I would have to say yes, only because he's a remarkable human being, and I don't want to take anything away from him, a really superb person. It's more the fact that I got to know the much maligned Grant and Sherman, who are, I think, much more interesting and certainly more about the country that we became. Lee is the vestige of the aristocracy, actually the best of that aristocracy, and he's going out. But Grant is the sort of middle class, troubled, dysfunctional man that will inherit the country.
Fairly at
for
all
good,
things except military.
Yeah, and love too.
And love.
He loved his wife.
He wrote his own memoirs.
He wrote his own memoirs.
And they're considered very good.
They're considered the best of the presidential memoirs, mostly because he didn't write about his presidency, which is one of the worst and most failed presidencies. He wrote about his military experience, and he wrote it to save his family. He found out he was dying of cancer at the same time he lost all his money in a stock market swindle. And he wrote furiously against the clock to finish his memoirs, and they became a bestseller.
What has all this done for you? I mean, obviously it's changed your life. It made you very much, I mean, everybody knows. I mean, is there I assume that also that Hollywood and all that represents want you, I mean, is that enticing because it gives you an opportunity to reach a different audience?
No, I'm actually happy to stay with them that brung me.
Yes, me too. That's mine.
Public television is a really unique place, and I think there are lots of pessimists in our organization, and you know them too, sort of see things darker than I think they are. I think we are poised to really do something. We don't have commercials, Charlie, and that's fantastic. And when that dial, as Bruce Springsteen says, fills up with 57 channels and nothing's on, and we learn how to make better programs, better history, better talk shows, better news shows, this will be the place where people will turn. And I'd like to extend that to drama. There's no reason why we couldn't even have sports here of a different nature looking at it. So
and what do you say, though, to those people who would say, and you and I have had this discussion on public television, public debate, a program about the debate on the funding, federal funding, who say to you, but not with my tax dollars, thank you very much.
Oh, I think this government is about sponsoring, about triggering things. It goes back to Thomas Jefferson. We're in the business of seeding things, and my goodness, what is the figure? 17% or something?
16,
that's a wonderful return on the investment to get the kind of things we're getting out of public television, if only the Defense Department worked that well, if only other aspects of our government did. I'm very sanguine, and I'm more than happy to turn away from the very flattering offers elsewhere and just say, look, I like what I'm doing, and I like this home. Absolutely, it's about home.
The happiest moments for you are in the editing room?
Three places. Right. When I'm out getting a shot, I do most of my own cinematography, or I've tried to. Lately it's been more difficult, but I'm out at dawn, and the cannon looks just so, or the baseball diamond is glimmering, or the Brooklyn Bridge has
grass is wet and all that.
Exactly, and I just feel alive. Or there's a moment in an editing room where you've solved a problem, where this photograph was inanimate and static and all the things we think that still photographs are. And all of a sudden, by wetting it with a piece of music and narration and a first-person voice or whatever it is, or put it next to a neighbor or went in and focused on a detail, it suddenly reminded you that the whole was greater than the sum of those parts, and you just feel like you're creating something. And then strangely, and I've just learned this lately, there's a moment when you realize that all that you've done out there at dawn or in the editing room had an effect on somebody else, and they want to know more, and they want to ask you a question. How did you feel about that? So it's talking to a little girl who just startled me one day on the circuit and just said, well, what is racism? We were talking about the Civil War and slavery, you know, and stuns you with the need to confront the central questions of the American experience, which is, of course, race and racism.
Pleasure to have you here on this
It's my pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Oh, good. It's to share it with you is important. When we return, Wendy Wasserstein will be here. What more can I say? Back in a moment.